and set forward peace among all persons through Jesus Christ our Lord. Let us say together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forever. Amen.
Honourable Senators, before we formally commence our proceedings, we have been informed of the passing of two of our former senators, and former Senator Anderson Morrison and former Senator Arnie Walters. I ask you to join me in a moment of silence in honour and respect of the passing of our two former members. May they rest in peace. The Senate is in session.
Messages from Her Excellency the President. Announcements by Your Honour.
But we have announcements. We have apologies for absence from Her Honour Senator Thompson, who's unwell, and Senator Most Honourable Ron Walker, who's overseas, as well as Senator the Honourable Chad Blackman. Indications of late arrival from Senator Gregory Nichols, Senator Chris Maynard, and Senator Monique Tate.
Minutes.
Minutes, we have in relation to our minutes of Wednesday, 15th of January 2025. These are to be deferred. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I'd like to move the deferral of the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, 15th of January 2025.
The question is that the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, January 15th, 2025 be deferred. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Those minutes are accordingly deferred.
Presentation of petitions. Presentation of papers. Report from select committees. Questions to ministers. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions related to the business or sitting of the Senate are moved by a minister.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I'd like to move the suspension of Standing Order 45-2 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I'd like to move the first reading of the Health Services Amendment Bill 2025 and also the first reading of the Foreign Currency Permits Bill 2025.
The question is that the Health Services Amendment Bill 2025 and the Foreign Currency Permits Bill 2025 be read a first time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. The ayes have it. Those bills are accordingly read a first time.
Public business, sir.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Sir, order number 10. In the name of the honorable leader of the Senate, who will move the second reading of the Foreign Currency Permits Bill 2025.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, thank you very much. This is a bill that has come up to this honorable chamber originating in our global business sector. And I think those of us who were in the Senate in 2018 remember a marathon night just on the eve of Christmas where we left this chamber somewhere in the wee hours of the night, very late hours of the night. On that night, we did, I believe there were 13 pieces of legislation. And it was because at the time there were, as we transitioned from one government to another, there were obligations that had been undertaken by the previous minister with responsibility for international business that then had to be very rapidly put into law. And we spent an entire night going through 13 bills. And so for those of us who sometimes are watching the number of bills we do in a day, that was a marathon night on that occasion. And that night came out of, as I mentioned, a previous administration having to implement a series of requirements under the OECD harmful tax practices, specifically the base erosion and profit shifting program. And a series of pieces of legislation needed to be repealed, needed to be replaced, and new regimes needed to come into effect. And on that basis, Mr. President, we saw that there were a number of pieces of legislation, in particular 9 preferential regimes that established what we used to call the offshore business sector, but no longer is called that because it is no longer compliant with the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development and our overall OECD Global Forum obligations. And so all international businesses began to be domesticated as local companies, beginning in 2019, the January of that year, immediately following that marathon session of the Senate in December of 2018. Barbados would have committed under the FHTP, Forum for Harmful Tax Practices, that's what it is, to take a number of actions and to undertake extensive amendments to the overall legislative framework governing that global business sector that I talked about. It was agreed to do a number of things, and these are some of the things that were agreed for the benefit of those that are listening: to remove provisions relating to legislation, including the International Society for Restricted Liability, to repeal the International Business Companies Act. I already pointed out that the notion of an international business company was no longer compliant with OECD rules, to remove the Exempt Insurance Act, CAP 308A, and to remove the International Financial Services Act, CAP 325. Then there were a number of other pieces of legislation that were also removed, and so we had to take a number of actions. I am going to take a moment to just go through what some of those actions were for the benefit of the colleagues. One, we needed to change the wording of our trust legislation. We needed to make changes also under our exchange control legislation. We needed to make some changes under our value-added tax legislation and the Property Transfer Tax Act. During that process, there were 2 main areas that were not included that really ought to have been included, and the action being taken now is to, 1, regularize the sector, as was said in the other place, but also to address 2 segments of the market that qualify to be holders of foreign currency permits, but were not incorporated under the original legislation. So, as I said before, this would have arisen out of 2018 and into 2019. And by definition, a person by law, namely a company, a juridical person in this case, entitled to be called a holder of a foreign currency permit, is a company, this is largely, that earns 100% of their revenue from outside of Barbados. Their earnings are 100% foreign currency and 100% outside of the country. So no local revenue generation at all, 100% outside of the country. Government had a task force. This task force has existed across governments over different times, and so this task force made a number of recommendations as it related to the foreign currency permits legislation. And so, in the first instance, having defined who is a foreign currency permit holder, the trust amendments to the trust legislation excluded trusts by definition, when trusts, as we see in other jurisdictions like the British Virgin Islands, like Cayman Islands, trusts really ought to have been incorporated, and you will see the amendment in the legislation to have trusts now listed. It meant then that with the omission of trusts under this legislation, those trusts that were originally set up as international trusts were therefore no longer eligible to be able to have the benefit of exemptions from exchange controls, stamp duty, indirect tax from VAT, and therefore there were some challenges that we experienced in the sector. You remember I started out by defining what an FTF, what the foreign currency permit holder looks like, how they earn their revenue, where their revenue comes from, and then the legislation that had to be amended as a consequence of the OECD actions. It meant, therefore, that you had a number of trusts which were then, therefore, called non-resident trusts. They were not considered resident by their registration, as it was at the time. They did not satisfy any of the requirements, but they earn 100% of their revenue out of Barbados. And so the proposal here, quite simply, is to have trusts now included in the legislation under the Foreign Currency Permits Act. Now, this regime started in 2019, and as a consequence, between 2019 and now, this segment of the market has not been able to benefit from the exemptions. Over this time, they have had the levying of 17.5% tax on trustee services on clients who otherwise have no connection to Barbados. If you're earning 100% of your revenue out of the country, then by definition, a local consumption tax ought not to apply. And so the simple thing here is that we want to make sure that Barbados is competitive, because that's where the second part of my presentation is going to go, with Barbados as a competitive jurisdiction. Secondly, we also had another significant exclusion. And the significant exclusion specifically is as it relates to the Customs Act. And in the customs legislation, you have a number of entities, namely manufacturing companies in particular, that have operations in Barbados, but they don't do business, substantial business in Barbados, but they have started to establish offices because under our economic substance legislation, also related to the OECD, there has been a requirement to establish a presence, to have some part of your operations domiciled in Barbados. And so they began the process of procuring office space, buying machinery, setting up equipment, and in many instances, as you are familiar, the Barbados Manufacturers Association, and already under the manufacturing sector, they already qualify if you are a manufacturer and so designated by law, you are already eligible for a duty-free exemption on your inputs because they are then considered re-exports. In this instance, if there were manufacturing entities, they qualified. But if they were not, they were in this no man's land that we are now seeking to correct. And so, in summary, the customs exemption and the inclusion of trust are the two principal elements that were excluded and are now being accounted for because they are covered under the 100% of their foreign currency earnings outside of Barbados. Now, if I were to go to the legislation itself now, the legislation has allowed for a number of changes that I want to draw to the Chamber's attention before I go to the specifics of my presentation on competitiveness. So as it stands, the legislation will make the following changes. In Section 2, the legislation speaks to that definition that I spoke about earlier. What is a qualified person? And the qualified person now reads, qualified person means a company, an external company, a firm, a society, or a trustee in relation to a trust, and I spoke about trust before, where the company, external company, firm, society, or trust, as the case may be, earns 100% of its income in foreign currency. It goes on to include the definition of what is a company, and that is an exclusion that is also not in the original legislation, but is now being corrected in this version of legislation. Shipping companies in particular were also not included. They are now being captured under the legislation, and the definition will now read, a company has a meaning assigned to it by the relevant section, and it includes a shipping corporation within the meaning of the Shipping Corporations Act. When I brought the Business Barbados legislation through this honorable chamber, establishing the company called Business Barbados, we talked about the principles of natural justice, the right to be heard, the right to appeal, making sure that there's transparency in why government does what it does. And my office has also sought to apply that same principle to this legislation. And so there are a number of principles that we have incorporated into the process of applying for a permit. Under the legislation, Section 32G has been amended to include that the official corporate number or registration number assigned to every entity carrying on business under this regime will now be covered as follows. 1, it covers the name, the address, basic information, and so on. And then in the event that your permit, previously existing or new permit, is either canceled or refused in its application, the director shall now give right notice in writing, as well as the reasons for refusing to grant a permit, the reason for canceling it, or the reason for refusing to renew an existing permit. Then the legislation goes on to make a number of additional amendments, equally as it relates to the details of the role of the director. They shall include the reason for the refusal, cancellation, or the non-renewal in their notice going out to the holder of a foreign currency permit. Then under the surrender of a permit, it also covers a number of things which are also being corrected previously. A person could submit, qualified person could submit a permit by filing a declaration with the director. The Act now makes provisions for the circumstances under which these permits can be surrendered. It covers the exemptions that I spoke about earlier under the Exchange Control Act, and it includes now the customs exemption, which was excluded originally, and it now says the following. Under Section 9A, it says machinery, equipment, etc., exempt from certain taxes and duties. And then it specifically outlines what the regime requires. It says a holder of a foreign currency permit may import free of customs duty, consumption tax, ad valorem stamp duty, and other like duties, taxes, and imposts, such plant, machinery, equipment, fixtures, appliances, apparatus, tools, and so on, as necessary for the holder of a foreign currency permit to carry on its business. In the event that you are selling this machinery or equipment required to carry on your business, because the designated time frame is 5 years, if you are selling them within the 5-year period, you either have to sell it to another holder of a foreign currency permit so it doesn't find itself into dutiable spaces in terms of the sectors, or alternately, you have to pay the amount of tax that was foregone. So you have two choices. You either keep it under the foreign currency permit regime, or if you're selling it to any of us in here who are not eligible for foreign currency permits, to the most part, to the best of my knowledge, then you have to pay the government the taxes. Then we go on, Mr. President, into the sections that I wanted to draw your attention to earlier on customs, and that is all captured in the relevant sections of the legislation. But I want then to draw your attention, Mr. President, to the state of the sector. And I think this is perhaps the most important part of the presentation, but I wanted to make sure that I gave the context for why we were making these changes. Mr. President, in 2019, when this regime started, as I said, in January 2019, coming out of the 2018 amendments. And for that very first year, Barbados had 586 new entities applying for a foreign currency permit. That was 2019. By 2020, there were 264 new entrants, 449 renewals, bringing the number to 713 in total. So we went from 586 in 2019 to 713 in 2020. In 2021, we had 1,892 new foreign currency permit holders, 585 renewals, and a total of 2,477 foreign currency permit holders. So a further increase from 713 to 2,477. By 2022, we had an additional 259 new foreign currency permit holders, 2,093 renewed their regime, and then you had a total up again of 2,352 foreign currency permit holders. In 2023, the International Business Unit recorded 288 new foreign currency permits, a total of 2,262 renewals, taking us to 2,550 active foreign currency permit holders. As at the end of last year, 2024, we now find ourselves in a position where 314 new foreign currency permit holders entered the market, 2,151 of the 2,352 of the previous year renewed, and we have now a total of 2,465 foreign currency permit holders. You can see the progression, therefore, Mr. President, from 2019 when the regime began and 2024, where we just finished the financial year, and the expectation is that by 2025, with this amendment, and with the amendments that we have just made as it relates to the customs duty, inclusion of trusts, removing or including the shipping sector, that the expectation from my ministry, Mr. President, is that we will see an increase in the foreign currency permit regime for the year 2025. Now, this is important, Mr. President, in context, and why? Mr. President, last week, I had the opportunity to chair a process that I believe you have led in a previous incarnation when you sat in this chair. The negotiation of your global regime with bilateral partners under bilateral investment treaties and double taxation agreements. We're now on the cusp of opening negotiations with a number of new partners. There are 4 immediate partners that we are on the cusp of negotiating. The negotiating team is preparing to travel next month to open negotiations with Germany. They will be continuing the second round of negotiations with Ghana, which we completed the first round in November and then into December. We will be opening also in March negotiations, Mr. President, with Hong Kong, and we expect that coming out of the work that we have started to do in collaboration with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and the Invest Barbados team, along with the Barbados Revenue Authority and others, all of the global business community partners, that we will be implementing a new strategic plan for the rollout of the attraction of global business to Barbados. That's one. We've also started the process of looking at the strategic repositioning of Barbados as a global business hub. What are the key things that we consider the mind of business? And we said to the team, we don't want you to consider the administrative part of it on our side only. We know what the regulatory parts of it require of us, but we want you to get into the mind of global business. What is the mischief that we are trying to correct? What makes Barbados more attractive a jurisdiction than another jurisdiction for like business? Because let me be clear, Barbados is not a BVI. They're a different jurisdiction than Barbados. Barbados is not a Cayman, different jurisdiction, different type of global business. Barbados is not a TCI, different jurisdiction, different segment of the market. While it's all global business, there are different segments and different niches that we compete in, and we're not in the same space. Trusts operate oftentimes in a different market, but by making these changes to our foreign currency permits legislation and including trust, it allows Barbados to compete in that space as well, whereas others typically would have held an advantage, a competitive advantage. This is a competitiveness measure, Mr. President. Earlier, and the point that I was starting to make is that last week we had a dedicated meeting where we had our global tax advisor, who was the former tax advisor for the OECD, and he is now advising Barbados, and he came down and he spent the week with us last week, along with the international business team, along with the Global Business Association, BIBA, ICAB, the Barbados Revenue Authority, of course led by the International Business Unit of the Ministry of Energy and Business, and with the private sector partners, so that together, not only are we setting the strategic framework that I spoke about, but we're also preparing for those negotiations that are up and coming over the coming months, Mr. President. And it really is about how do we not just want to talk about the mind of business, get businesses to come to Barbados in the first place to set up domicile, but then most importantly, you know, where you have exciting advertising, Mr. President, you see an ad, and the ad comes on, and you say, for example, it's advertising Burger King, and the burger looks good, and the fries look good, and you think to yourself, maybe I should go through the Burger King drive-thru today, and then you bite into it, and it doesn't taste the way it looks like it did. But just an example to tease my Senate colleague, but Mr. President, you want to make sure that when you market something, that what you have marketed, people feel as though you have delivered. And so on the one hand of this country, we cannot be marketing Barbados as a jurisdiction to do business, inviting companies to come to the country to domicile, and then not delivering on the brand promise that we have set up. And so I've spoken at great length in this chamber and in other places about the importance of business facilitation in this country. I have acknowledged openly in this chamber and in other places that business facilitation in this country sometimes can be a real challenge. I have said on many occasions over time that there were difficulties with the institution that we knew as KIPO, and that I acknowledge that both the business community and the staff at KIPO were challenged by the environment within which they functioned, and that it did not deliver on the brand promise of Barbados as a jurisdiction with which to do business. I am standing here today, Mr. President, having had the opportunity over the last year to absorb the entity that was KIPO into, over the last few days, on Saturday starting, into the new Business Barbados. Business Barbados that we've talked about for the last year, and Prime Minister announced, was created on Saturday. Or rather, I should say the legislation came into effect on Saturday. We took the opportunity on Friday evening to have almost a team building session with all of the staff from KIPO that will be transitioning over into Business Barbados. And we talked about what needed to be in terms of taking fresh guard. Taking fresh guard. Marking a line in the sand, covering it over in cement, and starting fresh. Coming with a new vision. Coming with new operational procedures. Fixing small things that are right in front of you that don't need no real big law thought process to resolve. Right, Mr. President? And we had that last session with the team, and I want to say that I am so privileged to lead a team that is excited, eager to make some of the changes. As we sat in that room with the team, yes, on Friday evening, closing off a new era and committing to starting a new one, the enthusiasm of those officers was overwhelming. Minister, we can make some recommendations, we think we should do this. When we finish this meeting, we have some things that we want to recommend that we can do differently. They too want this change. I'm saying to Barbados that the staff know at the new Business Barbados, they want this change. So Monday morning, I walked into Baobab Towers. And as I walked into Baobab Towers, Mr. President, one of the officers who had been in the meeting on the Friday, she popped out, "Are you looking for Business Barbados, mister?" And I said, "No, I wasn't here to y'all." And then I walked a little further along the corridor, and another one pops up, "Welcome to Business Barbados. Can I be of assistance?" And they were just so excited because there is a new customer-facing, customer experience orientation that has been designed and inbuilt into the Business Barbados model. It will take some time. We're talking about change management, we're talking about a culture change, we're talking about a step change. It's a huge step, and it will take some time. And I ask for the public and for each of us to show a little grace when dealing with the members of that team, because even as we are frustrated, they too, and I've said this before, have been frustrated, but they are committed to delivering change and to finding solutions. And so the first board meeting officially was held on Monday, and they spent, I believe, 5 hours in that first board meeting, a lengthy board meeting, making some critical decisions on the first orders of priority for the company. And I've given them some marching orders as minister in terms of policy. And these are the following things. And I want to say this here because I've said it in another environment. The business of business facilitation and protecting brand Barbados and delivering on that brand promise is not the custodian of only the government of Barbados. It is for all of us to address, and it is not the custodian only of CAIPO. And so we have undertaken the following high-order, first-order priorities. 1, how difficult is it for us to navigate other government agencies as well? In this legislation, the exemption for customs that was not there made it extremely difficult, because then members who were otherwise eligible for foreign currency permits had to wait for the Ministry of Finance to grant the waiver. And while they were waiting for the Ministry of Finance to grant the waiver, the goods were sitting, waiting to be cleared, but they couldn't do anything with it without the finance waiver. We need to be able to break down, deconstruct, and reconstruct those processes to make them easier for people to do business. We've spoken also about engagements with other government agencies, the BRA, National Insurance Scheme, Customs Department. How do we break down, deconstruct, as Prime Minister always says to us, and reconstruct those processes? Now, we've done a deconstruct and reconstruct for CAIPO. We've done a business process re-engineering process for CAIPO. We now know what needs to be done vis-a-vis the legislation for CAIPO, but we now need to have an all-of-government approach to deconstructing and reconstructing, so it is much easier for people to do business with the state. But I put the state up first because we must lead by example. But I took the opportunity last year at the Institute of Chartered Accountants annual general meeting to say to them and to the business community gathered there, business facilitation is not only about business with the state either. It's not only about regulatory compliance. And I took the opportunity to say then, as I will say here, delivering on the brand promise of Barbados and ensuring that Barbados is a place where businesses choose to do business is also for accountants to ensure that we are able to get management accounts and audited financial statements and on an annual basis in a timely manner in order to be able to satisfy governance requirements. It is also important for us to be able to dissect what is going to be important for what type of transaction and how do we break down those processes and make them more easier to access for people. It is also about, Mr. President, how long it takes to complete legal transactions. It is also about how we get legal transactions completed in a way that allows for us to close transactions. It is also, Mr. President, about how long it takes for us to be able to close deals once conveyances and all those things have been completed. How long does it take to complete these things? That is a part of business facilitation, Mr. President. We talked a lot about the banking community. How long does it take to access a loan? How long does it take to open a bank account? The business of business facilitation and delivering on the brand promise that is Barbados as a place to do business is all of our business. It is a business, it is the business of the government of Barbados, it is the business of the private sector and the professional associations of Barbados, and it is the business of the service providers who are intermediaries along the way. The business of doing business is all our business. And so one of the first order priorities for the first quarter of this year for Business Barbados is the development of standard operating procedures and service level agreements with a number of main private sector partners, namely the accountants and bankers and all of them, to be able to figure out how do we break down antiquated processes, excuse me, make them easier, excuse me, how do we break down antiquated processes, make them easier for people to navigate while still complying with our compliance obligations. One of the things that I said in a meeting this week with another team was, it's easy for all of us to look at everybody else. So everybody knew the problems with KIPO because everybody experienced it. And we're clear, we own them. But let us look also at the ecosystem that surrounds doing business in this country. And that ecosystem is public and private sector, and it requires all of us to elevate our game. So that line in the sand that KIPO now has to draw on my instruction and covering it over with cement is also a line in the sand that needs to be drawn for many private sector entities, for many private sector transactions. And we are committed, this is not a blame game, we are committed to working with each of those partners to see how together, working towards the same goal, we can collaborate the same way we did a business process re-engineering process for us. We will be collaborating to see how we can do a business process re-engineering process for all of government, and then equally for our partners in the private sector. I am happy that our partners have been on board and have been supportive and have been willing to work with us towards the same goal. And I have every confidence that once this work is completed in time to come, that it will be something that Barbadians can hold up as a thing of pride. But the implications thereof, Mr. President, will be, we expect by 2025, 2026, and what I've asked from the team is to set targets, revenue targets, number of businesses that we are going, number of companies that we will be going after in each various segment of the market on an annual basis. Where do we want to go? I just went through the numbers from 2018 when the regime began up to 2024. So am I going to be comfortable, Mr. President, with 2024 numbers? No, clearly not. Am I going to be comfortable with 2018 numbers? No. Even though we have seen a steady increase in the numbers, is that really the pace of increase that we require, or should it be an accelerated increase? That's really the kind of granularity that you're going to be seeing coming out of our team going forward. And I am confident that with these changes that are before this honorable chamber and the other non-FCP measures that go along with us as a competitive jurisdiction, that Barbados is positioning itself for a whole of government reform process, and then to position ourselves to deliver on a brand promise that Barbados is indeed a place not just to do business by marketing, but we deliver on that brand promise. And with those few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill is read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. Senator Walters.
Good morning, Mr. President. I'd like to contribute briefly to the foreign currency permit bill that is before the chamber. And I first would like to commend Senator Cummings for her thorough presentation as it relates to giving us in the chamber, giving Barbados the comfort that Barbados is still pursuing rigorously global business. It is very important to our existence. And as you know, we need the foreign currency because we import most of what we use in Barbados. And so the opposition supports the bill in theory, Mr. President, as it relates to the pursuit of ensuring that there is an ease in terms of the persons who are qualified to access these permits, and the benefits in which they get the permits should be hassle-free as well, and should be fair across, and should be a level playing field across all the sectors that fall under the regime. But while we commend the work that has been done in the, I will use the word, the global business sector under the Ministry of Business, and it seems, based on the numbers here, that we have seen significant increases in the foreign currency permits. In other words, more persons are doing business, and we are in a position where we are earning or have the ability to earn more foreign exchange for our country. It is still important that we look at this from a holistic perspective, Mr. President, and we don't have all this hard work going into trying to drive business in, which will bring us foreign exchange, a tax revenue in foreign currency, but also that we also safeguard what we have and look at other areas where we are using foreign exchange or where we are not earning the foreign exchange that we should as a country. So while we support the bill before us today, just want to raise just a few questions and just to really share some information as it relates to the foreign exchange position of the country, as it relates to where we are, and some of the challenges that the country still faces, and some of the things that the government must accord some priority to. And as we speak about foreign currency, the first thing I would raise here, Mr. President, or highlight, is that our merchandise trade balance is widening. As you know, we continue to import almost even more than we've imported in the past, and with the prevalence of inflation, that only makes it worse. But at December 2024, the trade balance was $2.5 billion in deficit, and that is about $1 billion more than it stood at the end of 2018. And it's significant. $1 billion is a lot, is widening. You went from 1.46 billion to 2.5 billion in the trade deficit. So while the imports have grown because of obviously the demand from Bajans in terms of their purchasing power or their needs or their wants, and coupled by inflation, we have seen that rise of imports into Barbados has grown from $3 billion to $4 billion as well. But what has not grown, Mr. President, is our exports out of Barbados. And in 2018, we had exports of 1.5 billion Barbados dollars. In 2024, at December, we had annual exports of $1.5 billion as well. So that has remained flat over the last 6 years. And it's important that the government must pay manufacturing some attention. It has also been brought to my attention that in our industrial estates, now we're seeing a conversion of persons using them as bonds to store product. And they're going out of manufacturing use. So we get to get an update from the government on our estates, our manufacturing estates, and what is occupancy on those, and what are the types of businesses that are being generated, and what those businesses are contributing to the export of goods out of Barbados to help earn foreign exchange. Because we don't want a position where importers now are occupying that, are encouraged to occupy that prime real estate that we should be using to put manufacturing in place to store products that they import, Mr. President. So that is the first area that I wish to draw to the attention of the chamber. The second area, Mr. President, when we look at and we consider what we import versus what we export, we cannot ignore agriculture because we have to eat. And agriculture is on a significant decline. Significant, Mr. President. And that decline, not only is it a year-on-year decline compared to 2023 and 2024, but it is a 27% decline from 2019. At the end of 2024, agriculture declined 27% when compared to 2019. And that is significant. That is a crisis in terms of agriculture. It's a crisis, and it affects and impacts all of that hard work that Senator Cummings has alluded to in terms of traveling, consultants, raising the numbers of persons that are holding foreign currency permits that are working to bring foreign exchange in. And then we are seeing significant dependence on agriculture, meaning we are spending more money to bring food in to pay for our person, to feed our nation. So this is an important aspect that should not go unrecognized, Mr. President, in this whole discussion of having access to foreign exchange or encouraging foreign exchange or encouraging entities to bring foreign exchange into Barbados. One of the other areas, and interestingly so, Mr. President, is tourism. And in the last Central Bank briefing, we are told that tourism is actually on an increase. And when we do look at the statistics from the Barbados Statistical Service, we can't disagree. There were more long-stay visitors in 2024 than there were in 2019, 2018, 2017. And that is a good sign for the country. And we need to continue to make every effort to make sure that we continue to attract tourists to our country. But when you look at the contribution to the GDP of tourism, Mr. President, that is where you start to get a little headache. It is worrisome because although you're seeing an increase in the number of stay-over passengers to the country, you're actually seeing a decline in the contribution to the GDP of tourism. So on one hand, you're seeing an increase of tourism, persons coming into the country, but you're not seeing that increase in contribution in terms of what those persons are contributing to our gross domestic product. And when you do a correlation between the two, Mr. President, it tells you that the contribution per long-stay visitor has moved from $141.34 in 2019 down to $99.91 in 2024. That is a decline of 29% in terms of the long-stay visitors' contribution to the GDP and tourism.
Just for the record, those last stats are from what was the source of the figures that you're quoting?
Sorry, Mr. President, the source of the information I'm referring to is in the Central Bank report of 2024.
The annual report, or which?
No, the Q4 report. The last report I was...
Quarter four. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. President, while we consider that we are in getting more visitors, we are also seeing a decline in the contribution to GDP. We've seen a significant fall off from the spend or the contribution per long-stay visitor to GDP, going from $141.34 in 2019 down to $99.91 in 2024. And this is information coming from the Central Bank of Barbados, Mr. President. We're also seeing as well that the average number of days that passengers stay have reduced. But I just raised these points, Mr. President, because as I said before, we can't just be overworking one department, one ministry, one area of focus, trying to get business, trying to close the gap on our foreign exchange deficit. And then on the other hand, we are not paying enough attention to some of these details that have the ability to contribute significantly to our ability to earn foreign exchange and the ability for us to retain foreign exchange or not to spend foreign exchange, as is the case with agriculture. Mr. President, as I continue, one of the other areas that is critical to foreign exchange and is ranked high on any government's agenda is the net foreign direct investment that the government is able to attract. And again, Mr. President, I've listened many times to the senators in this chamber and to those in other places, and they always speak about investment, how much investment this government has been attracting. and how well they are doing in terms of increasing investment and new projects and construction boom next year and so forth. But when you look at the net foreign direct investment as reported by the Central Bank again, Mr. President, in 2018, the net foreign direct investment was $464.8 million. And in 2024, direct investment, net foreign direct investment is $468 million, a mere 0.69% increase, and that is over a 6-year period, Mr. President. So the words are not really matching up to the numbers, and I think more effort needs to be given to bringing in foreign direct investment. As I said, Mr. President, there's a lot of conversation, a lot of PR, a lot of talk about the investment that's coming into Barbados, but we're not seeing in the reports from the Central Bank of Barbados. In 2018, Mr. President, just in case one of the senators was making a comment did not hear me, in 2018, Mr. President, the net foreign direct investment was $464.8 million. In 2019, Mr. President, that fell 19% to $375.3 million Barbados dollars. In 2019, Mr. President, the Barbados Day Party administration had 1 full year of governance. In 2021, Mr. President, that amount was $417.8 million. In 2023, it was $449.8 million, all below the amounts in 2018, pre them coming to office, $464.8 million, just to clarify for Senator Nichols, who is murmuring in my ears, Mr. President. Mr. President, the final area that I wish to highlight as it relates to managing our foreign reserve situation, our foreign currency situation, is our debt position. And it must be noted, Mr. President, that the government has taken a policy of shifting away from domestic borrowing to external borrowing. And the external debt, Mr. President, of the government moved from $3.3 billion between 2018 and 2019 to $5.6 billion at the end of December 2024. So that's a $2.7 billion increase, and that is in external debt. And you know, Mr. President, we have to pay that back in foreign currency. So again, this is a very important area that the government has to consider, because again, you're going to whip the horse of global business. You're going to tell them to go and bring in all this investment. We're going to move companies here. We support the effort, but you cannot be doing that. You can't be erasing the gains with policy that can literally erase the gains overnight. So having a policy that shifted your debt from domestic debt, where you would repay in Barbados dollars, to foreign debt, where you now have to look for foreign currency. And as I said, Mr. President, you're moving from $3.3 billion 2018, 2019, to $5.6 billion in December 2024. And then you still have more debt coming as you are in a relationship with the International Monetary Fund, etc. So this is a significant area that the government must pay attention to and must consider revising its policy as it relates to how they pursue debt. We know that the government has there has been a loss of confidence in the market since the debt restructuring in 2018. We have not seen any indication, although has been said, but we have not seen any indication that confidence has returned, other than a few commercial banks picking up some government debt, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I was in a point of order. I think that the Honourable Senator might be choosing his words perhaps not carefully, and therefore is misleading not only the House but the country when he suggests that there's no indication that confidence has been returned to Barbados since 2018. Mr. President, as far as I am aware, Barbados has been removed not only from a number of grey lists in terms of emphasizing our compliance, but two as well, we have also recently as well been upgraded from where we were on several by several rating agencies. I'm a little bit unsure. The same central bank report as well also indicates that there has been growth. So Mr. President, I'm struggling a little bit because I really would like the honourable senator, as much as he needs to make his points, to be truthful to the facts as they are.
Thank you, Senator. Please continue, Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, very often when I am speaking, I find that persons have to raise on what they consider point of orders that no one else understands. It's not even a point, Mr. President, and they're not listening to what I am saying. Mr. President, I said that it is clear there's no indication that the confidence in the domestic market has returned. Mr. President, I am saying the domestic market has returned. I am saying, Mr. President, that having the government force a bond issue on public servants to buy them off the next month is not confidence, Mr. President. I am saying the central bank having to print money over in 2023 and 2024, over $200 million to support the government's agenda, Mr. President, is not investor confidence, Mr. President. So I am saying to you, Mr. President, that the policy of the government and the shift from borrowing locally to borrowing externally has a negative impact as relates to us trying to manage what little foreign exchange that we earn through tourism, which, as I said, the gross domestic product's contribution is in decline, through agriculture, where agriculture is in significant decline, and we have to import all sorts of food that we eat. So, Mr. President, it's very clear what I am saying, Mr. President. And as I continue to wrap up, Mr. President, I encourage Senator Cummings and her team to continue the good work that they have been doing. Based on the information provided, they have made strides in terms of increasing our ability and maneuvering through the storms of the global environment, financial environment, and we're happy to see that, but it cannot be eroded by bad policies in other areas of government, Mr. President. So as I said, Mr. President, Mr. President, agriculture is on the decline by 27.5% when compared to 2019. Tourism, although the numbers are up, we are seeing a reduction in its contribution to the gross domestic product of our country, where the tourism contribution per long-stay visitor has decreased by 29% over the last 6 years, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, with those few words, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Walters. Senator Kevin Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I was listening to the debate and the contributions that shortly concluded, it reminds me sometimes of a trial, sir. And when you are in the middle of your point, your colleague, like Senator Nichols, would get up and raise an objection. And the objection sometimes is for the purpose of clarifying or to indicate that you're taking the judge somewhere that the judge ought not to go. But sometimes it's also done to throw you off your stride. So one must be mindful when objections are raised, wherever they are, that it's just simple to deal with them by continuing to move forward. Now, sir, for my part, in considering this bill, I think that I don't know if I join with my colleague who just spoke in reference to the situation as to the foreign currency reserves. I believe that the statistics, for what they're worth, show that we have high level of foreign currency reserves. What I believe, however, has been questioned is how we have gotten these high level of reserves and the attendant cost of maintaining the level of reserves. But for the purpose of the metric, and we always talk about how many weeks of import cover, my understanding is that we have quite a lot. There are economists, there are politicians, there are statisticians who talk about, well, you know, even though you have that, it comes at a certain cost. And I believe those who are able to speak on it can elucidate that point further. From my perspective, though, Mr. President, foreign currency, and we understand the purpose of the bill to facilitate the government's international business objectives, I think foreign currency in Barbados and the concept of exchange control has always been one of those topics which, not sexy, but essential to our stability. And it is a tedious consideration for foreign currency and exchange control, especially, as Senator Malu would indicate, for the purposes of purchases, where you have to bring the money in, you register, so that when you get the money out, you're able to get it out because you have the control of what's coming. That sometimes takes a while and causes hiccups. But we see the benefit in this tedious exercise by seeing how we're unable to avoid the pitfalls that we see currently being encountered by our neighbors in the Caribbean. What, however, is interesting is that while some to the south may have a situation where there's a dearth of US currency for whatever reason, others to the north, with liberal access, have a situation where there is a lot of US currency, but then you're dealing with a local currency that is somewhat low or very low. So it's a balancing act that is maintained. As I said, it's not sexy, but it serves a purpose for the concept of stability. Now, stability and profit, two separate things. Sir, the central bank, we have seen, has taken initiatives to make the purchase of foreign currency somewhat easier. There's a portal. They have advertised the portal. It's on social media. You can go and you go onto your portal and you indicate what you want your currency for and you utilize it. I have never used it. My wife does because she does the spending, foreign currency. The portal as such is an initiative in terms of how the monies move. Now, I spoke about exchange control and the registration of monies coming in for things like purchases of real estate. And I think that process is one which, while tedious, is known and everyone is able to participate once you're in the industry. What sometimes gets to be a bit difficult is when you're doing something a little different. So let's say you've received an order from the court successfully acquiring some monies for your client who is overseas. Getting that money out requires some more steps because it's a unique transaction. But we're moving in the right direction. I've also seen, sir, that there's an increase in the ability, I believe the legislation and the regulations were promulgated to allow Barbadians to hold US accounts a bit easier than it was some years back. Indeed, it is a sign of, and I heard a conversation about investor confidence. There was a question when at one time how many US dollars were actually being kept in the island, but we don't have a metric for the measurement. And I do enjoy the discussions as to whether investors are confident and what is the empirical evidence, and I like the reference to the various agencies, and those agencies have been dismissed by certain political parties, but it shows the dialogue, sir, and the different ways we view what we describe as something as confidence in the market. Now, sir, I see this legislation as an attempt and a continued attempt to improve the ease of business in Barbados. Now, that being said, sir, the process is still burdensome and time-consuming, and something which the minister who spoke to lead off the bill has indicated quite clearly. The need for foreign currency is really driven, in my mind, sir, and this is without any economic basis or training, by two things. We're either using it in the spending category, where as Barbadians we want certain luxuries or we want certain things that make life a little easier, comforts. Then, of course, there are the needs in terms of a business which is importing stuff into the island to be sold on at a most interesting markup. And then, of course, we have the educational aspect where Barbadian citizens send their children overseas and need access to foreign currency to pay the bills. Another need, sir, is, of course, to invest. And we have to ask ourselves, why do Barbadians need foreign currency to invest? And the reason is this, that if we turn on our TVs and we watch the news and we see the report about the trading on the Barbados stock market, we could almost repeat it by rote, like when we describe the weather and the height of the waves with fear to scattered showers and waves medium, whatever, 1 point something meters in open areas. When we look at the dearth of investment opportunities, and while we welcome the initiative of the government with regard to the concept of the unit trust, as was stated in another area, sir, the fact is that there is a need for Barbadians to seek foreign currency to invest within the region. Because if you want to go and invest in, let's say, the Jamaica stock market, which is very active, you need to get the currency. If you want to go invest in the Trinidadian stock market, which is very active, but the dividends coming out as a different thing, you need the foreign currency. So there is an interplay between this less sexy mechanism, foreign currency regulation, and the need of Barbadian citizens, the wants of Barbadian citizens, and the requirement of Barbadian citizens if they wish to invest. And as the minister has indicated, quite frankly, doing business in Barbados is not easy, and it takes so much patience. I would like to consider myself a somewhat knowledgeable investor, and the requirements which have been put on me to do simple transactions have left me in almost a Zen-like state, because that is what is required to deal with all the requirements, what you have to produce. Currently, I have an institution which has 3 forms of ID. 3 forms of ID. My ID card, my driver's license, and my passport. And they said to resend the passport because it was a little blurry. We then have the situation, sir, of while we're doing all of this in terms of how things take and what are the requirements that things take, we got the AML and the KYC, which we know we have to do, but the process of doing it is not easy. When I onboard a client and I have to send the instructions, and before I do anything, I have to say, fill out this form and let me know who your banker is, and your banker got to verify that he knows you from Adam and give me the history of your transactions. There's some people who say, well, that's too much. So how do we find this balance in terms of business, investment, and ease without making it a free-for-all? Because you don't want a situation which they have referenced in past debates of people turning up in your office with a suitcase full of cash, walking up to a bank teller and depositing hundreds of thousands. You just come in the island for a day on a cruise ship. So too far left is right, but doing business in Barbados is not easy. Even closing deals, I heard the minister speak about the fact that we all must play a part, and that's true. But the reality is, all the vision and all the ideas, sometimes we sit in here and it's almost like an echo chamber. And I'm glad to hear the concept of the enthusiasm of the members of Business Barbados, and I wish the government luck. But you see this thing called execution? you see this thing about execution of what is to be done is a whole different ballgame. And when you're doing something new, you're going to get resistance because it's changed. I had a conversation with and I will not call the name, but I had a conversation where in trying to get a certain transaction done and listening to the dutiful public servant on the other end of the line, I just knew to take my deep breaths and sip my tea. And we still didn't move forward. So I wish the government and the country all the luck it can get in business Barbados. All I would say is that when you're putting sand and concrete, you may want to put a little rebar so the foundation stays strong. Now, on a somewhat tangential but relevant portion of the debate, I think it would be remiss not to have a conversation or to have a conversation about foreign currency and licenses and international business and trust without mentioning the rise or the resurgence of the crypto market. I think now with the benefit of hindsight, we missed the boat in terms of where we were as a country in dealing with crypto. Sir, there was a paper done in 2015 by the Barbados Central Bank, Jeremy Stevens and Winston Moore on the Central Bank website, sir. The reference is there. 2015 is the article, positing whether or not a portion, small portion, of the Barbados Stability Reserve for the Central Bank should be kept in crypto coins. Bitcoin was the one that was utilized for the purpose as the example. And the concept and the metrics and everything was laid out as to why. But it's something new, especially in 2015. And now with the benefit of hindsight, we see where that could have been. SAB 121 was repealed, sir. That's the American restriction against investments in crypto and banks holding crypto assets. It's a field day. It's a field day. There was a time when there was an institution where Barbadians could have walked in and given their local fiat and purchased this thing called Bitcoin. For whatever reason, and the benefits and the risks were understood, that was stopped. And we understand the concept of banking and what's the term, sir, related bank transactions and the risks that occurred. So while there are digital currency initiatives which are ongoing in terms of producing local stable coins and every central bank and ease of doing business, it all ties in relation to the ease of doing business and moving money from one area to the other. It takes too long. The concept and the promise of digital currency is that it can be done quickly, it can be done safely. And now with the fact that the new world order, the new world order is embracing it, I think it's time that the government has a serious relook as to how we can position ourselves. Because quite frankly, sir, when we hear the rhetoric and we see the policies which are coming forth and we see the variation, it is somewhat concerning. So not only is it a question of doing business, and not only is it a question of foreign currency, and not only is it a question of compliance and taking part in international trade and best practice, but there has to be a consideration of stabilization for what is coming. Sir, that 15% international, the whole world going tax, who knows where that will be when we come back to debate in this chamber. So all the steps that were being taken in a certain direction may have to be adjusted. But those are just my musings, sir. At the end of the day, the legislation makes sense. The objective is clear. Thank you for the opportunity to make my contribution, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Boyce. More speakers?
Sir,
Senator Maladou.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry, Senator Morris, I hope I did not rise ahead of you. I didn't notice you. I would have yielded to you, sir. But I won't be long. 3 quick points, Mr. President, on this matter. I had really planned to make one, but it seems that my fellow senators have made me think in a couple other directions, and that's where I think often these debates are useful, where they bring points of view that I myself hadn't thought of. I'll start with the one that I had wanted to make just very briefly. First of all, I support the amendment. It is, in fact, fixing something that we shouldn't have gotten wrong in the first place. The purpose, when leader of government, but as explained to us, when we changed from the previous IBC regime to the current regime, was that those businesses would be in no worse position after the changes were made. But unfortunately, in this one area, they were. But sir, I just want to use this as an example to make the point that I have made a number of times before. When you have an uncompetitive economy, you have to have laws to make you artificially competitive. And when we get this wrong, and we make a mistake as we did here, and we left one small aspect out, we fall back to the natural state. High duties, high taxes, uncompetitive. So we have to come back and we have to fix it. For me, the solution to all of these things has always been, let us have a naturally competitive environment so we don't have to put artificial measures in place to make us competitive. That was really the only point I wanted to make, but picking up on what 2 other fellow senators made, I'd like to join with Senator Boyce and wish the government well in execution for Business Barbados, because that is where we are going to tell if we change from a state of frustration to a state of facilitation through these new measures that we're taking under Business Barbados. And I would like to reiterate my call that I made previously from this floor. Now that the legislation is passed, now that we are all encouraged and we're excited by this, is can we hear what the standards of service are going to be? How long will it take for us to do certain things within these industries? We heard that that was going to come next. It didn't need to be in the legislation itself, but it was going to come afterwards. Well, now is afterwards, and perhaps it's coming, and I look forward, and I will give the Minister, who I have great faith and confidence in, all the scope to come and let us know what that's when those standards of service are going to be there, and we can all hold them to it. Lastly, sir, Senator Boyce made some comments about crypto, and I will use this opportunity to share my silly views on the matter. Personally, I believe that crypto is a method to facilitate business. In and of itself, it is not an investable commodity. And that has been where all of the excitement gets around crypto in this world, Bitcoin and otherwise, how much money you can make from it. But sir, itself, it is not an investable vehicle. When you buy Bitcoin, you are simply waiting on someone who will pay tomorrow more for it than what you paid for it today. It has no inherent value. But for businesses and for Barbados, I agree with the Senator that should we embrace crypto as a form of doing business? Absolutely we can. And absolutely with the big neighbor to the north who seems to be embracing it, I would agree. Let's get on that bandwagon as well. So, sir, with those few words, I support completely the amendment. We are fixing what needed to be fixed. It's being done. Perhaps it could have been done quicker, but it's being done today, and it will have my support. I thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Mullen. Senator Reverend Morris.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too would not be very long on this issue, but I just want to raise a few points. First of all, I would like to lend my support to this particular piece of legislation and congratulate the government itself for seeing the necessity to make this type of business transaction easier. I hope, sir, that throughout the country, as other colleagues have mentioned, doing business will become easier and easier in Barbados, but we still have a long way to go as far as that is concerned. And I have no doubt that the particular measures will be put in place so that business can be done with some degree of ease and safety. I agree with Senator Boyce on the issue of having to produce all these pieces of information in order to have some personal business done, maybe in terms of mortgages. All of these things, sir, it is really tedious. Sometimes you wonder if you're a Barbadian when you have to produce all of these pieces of ID to prove that you are a Barbadian and that you qualify to have what you now seek to have. It is incumbent upon us that while we make certain sections easy, that we make all of Barbados easy to do business. And for that, I want to congratulate the government. If this is a start, then so may be it. But I think we should move with haste now to ensure that Barbados is really business friendly. In terms of this move in relation to agriculture, so I think that we are pushing a matter just as a scare tactic. In my view, agriculture was in decline since 1807. At that time, it was a monocrop society, sir. And that monocrop diminished, and the attendance system with it went. This is not my original idea, sir. This is done by J.L. Ragatz, Joseph L. Ragatz, and all them since we're back, and Eric Williams. So it was in decline then, and in my view, it never recovered. Why? Because even the late, great, excellent Wright and all of these things, Barrow, recognized that in 1960, when he said that he would like to look from St. Philip to St. Lucie without saying a campaign. I understand it, sir. Because given the way the sugar was performing, he knew that he had to diversify, and the diversification was also very tenuous. Why? Because of the land in Barbados. What did you want the government to do, including the Democratic Labour Party government? What did you want them to do? Cut up the land into peasantries as was done in Haiti? Because when you do that, then your economy becomes very soft. Peasant farming and peasant agriculture will not suffice a country. And there's all this talk going around about land. 1 minute we want the land for agriculture, and the next minute we want the land for housing. And we've got to make up our minds. But I have always been of the opinion that land should be used for its highest economic benefit. It has always been that way. It is okay to talk about agriculture, sir, but in the larger countries, agriculture is subsidized by the governments. Can the government of Barbados agree to subsidize agriculture to the extent of other countries? The last thing I want to speak on, sir, is this whole matter, because it comes up in here every time there's some attempt to improve either doing business or to improve the economy of Barbados. It comes up in here about debt. May I inform the authorities, sir, or those who, the protagonists of this view, that Up to 2018, the economy of Barbados was small in comparison to what it is now. The economy is larger. The question that we should be asking, can we manage our debt? The evidence suggests so far that we are managing that debt. And I believe that these statements that are made in here should not go unchallenged. That is the debt part of it. But there's another issue that was just raised, that the government has made a shift to international borrowing, but put that into context, sir. Put that into context or what some people refer to as exigence. Put it into exigence, sir. There was a shift to international borrowing because the Democratic Labour Party had brought this country to its knees. They could not borrow internationally. They could not even borrow locally. They had to borrow from the central bank and the national insurance scheme. These are the places they borrowed from. So don't come and tell me today. Huh? Huh? Don't come and tell me today that we are borrowed about the borrow from the international market as opposed to the local market. At that time, sir, the government could not borrow from the international market because of the downgrades. It would have been too expensive, and nobody was going to lend the government the money. So when we talk about these things, talk about the context. And right now, we are getting loans from the IMF at 2%, lower than you will get it from banks, sir. And these are the things that were omitted. And I believe, sir, that rather than run attempt to make Barbadians to be so scared and afraid, that we should always put things in the context with the truth. With the truth. And I hope someday that we in this chamber will be able to debate truth. Truth! Because we see what is happening now in the world, and I'm hoping that sometime we'll be able to debate it. And I hope that we can maintain our standards of not trying to fool a public. Make a public so scared they're afraid to do anything. I thank you, sir.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Senator Reverend Morris. Senator, the Honorable Lyndall Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President, for allowing me to have a little intervention into this debate. And I join the chorus in saying up front that I support this bill. I recognize, of course, its importance in terms of facilitating the operations and the efficiencies of those companies which operate in the international financial services sector. Of course, we really shouldn't be talking about international financial services sector companies and so on now, because we have gone through the process of leveling out the playing field in terms of taxes and several other issues which had created problems for us by dealing with the OECD and the EU and so on. So we are all effectively local companies, although some are operating, or I should say trading, perhaps entirely in the overseas, offshore market. But yes, it is important if a company, and it makes sense, if a company is generating 100% of its revenues and its income from foreign currency, why should it have to then, at the end of the day, go through the tedious process of getting permission to be able to repatriate or to deal in normal trading and getting that various permissions to be able to operate efficiently. So I think that is certainly important. And I think government, of course, we have been saying for the longest time, look, government has to find some alternatives to tourism. And so anything that helps to build up and to grow this sector is certainly a good idea. And recently we had in this Honorable Senate, we, for example, were debating the shipping bill, which some shipping bills which hopefully has the potential, which could also generate foreign exchange as well. So it seems to me we're going in the right direction when we are looking to find things which can help to generate foreign currencies from trade in sectors other than, from the business sectors other than tourism. One of the things I would like to see, and I believe it was mentioned by Senator Boyce, deals with really the ordinary citizen wanting to go and wanting to get hold of, from foreign currency for travel and so on. I, for example, got caught in the system pretty recently, probably about a month or two ago, where you wanted to travel. And as usual, I went to the bank and to get some foreign currency. And they said, but have you made an application through the portal? And at that time, to be honest, Mr. President, I really wasn't familiar that this system had now come in. What I'm saying is, I think that we have been boasting for quite a while now that, our level of foreign exchange is at such that it does not create any issues in terms of being able to service our foreign debt and so on. And I believe perhaps it's time for the central bank and the powers that be to look at maybe releasing any other foreign impediments. I mean, know that a lot of progress has been made over time in terms of freeing up the foreign currencies and being able and making it easier. But I think we've come to the stage where we can do more. I think we should allow the banks to completely take over and run and manage the foreign currencies so that it makes life that much easier for all of us who from time to time may need to, have a little foreign currency when we travel. I think, for example, it just crossed my mind, perhaps we could even encourage the employees, and we know that we have a fairly significant number of our labor force who work in the international financial service sector. Why not encourage those companies to pay them in foreign currency? Is that possible? So that they themselves, the local staff, would then begin to build up foreign currencies as well. And, we can put them in the bank, they can bank them, and, when they have to travel or otherwise, they have their own accounts from which they can draw down and so on. And so since, it is, for what it's worth, I'm throwing it out as something we could try to encourage the businesses in the offshore sector to do. The other thing I would like to see, and I believe I raised this in a previous debate, Mr. President, is that I would like to see, I think the time has come for the removal of the 2.5% foreign exchange fee. It was introduced, I know, at a time when there was some pressure on the foreign reserves, and therefore it was necessary. But I think that over the last few years, we have all been boasting year after year of the level of foreign exchange that we possess, and therefore it does not seem to be any longer an issue in terms of creating problems when we have to do our debt repayments and so on. And so I feel it could be a little ease. Perhaps it's something, again, that government, as they are now in the process of preparing the annual estimates of revenue and expenditure, and of course, subsequent to that, we will have the budget, that the finance, Minister of Finance, Prime Minister could consider as some little ease. Certainly, we have heard that the government is making surpluses, so there are things that could be some little give back at this time. I just want also to comment on, and I was overseas last week, but while traveling, I was sort of listening to some debates, and I heard some discussion about dollarization and so on. And I think that while it's something that is worth having a discussion about, I would just like to caution and to caution us all that, certainly in my opinion, I believe the peg of $2 to $1 US for all of the years that we have been operating on our own has served us well and in good stead. And I would just like to say, for what it's worth, I hope there wouldn't seek for any time any tampering with that situation. I know former Prime Minister Erskine Sandiford, he had some big fights, for example, with the IMF in terms of maintaining that parity. And while we may talk about dollarization and so on, even if we go that route, I hope that that parity will always be maintained, because of it has, in my opinion, it has served us in good stead, and I think it can continue to do so for a long time, because we have been able to manage or to counterbalance the issues that could arise in terms of devaluation, and so we have been able to counterbalance by certain various fiscal measures which we have introduced over time. And so, for what it's worth, again, I just throw that out. So, Mr. President, I support this bill, and I hope to see that this initiative to try to increase the efficiency in operations in this sector will bear fruit, and that we will see this sector beginning to recover and to grow over time. And with those few words, Mr. President, I am obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator. The Honourable Lyndall Nurse. The speakers, please. No more? Senator Cummings, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And of course, I start by expressing appreciation to all of the honorable senators who have spoken. Senator Walters, in his response, obviously also, like everyone else, supported the objectives of the bill, supported the objectives of business facilitation. I do, however, want to request Senator Walters to share the reference point from which he was quoting with regard to the printing of money, because while I was sitting and waiting for my turn to respond to the comments on the bill, I did take the opportunity to check in with the central bank, and they have confirmed that they have no such record of us printing money in the way it was described in the Senate. So I would encourage the reference to be submitted to support the statement that Barbados printed money during that period.
Mr. Walters.
Mr. President, the Central Bank report, review of the Barbados economic performance, January to December 2024. And I go to page I go to page 33, Mr. President. Under the heading bonds, central bank, bonds and central bank, 2018-2019, 414.4 million, 2019-2020, 414.4 million, 2020 to 2021, 414.4 million, 2021 to 2022, 444.4 million, an increase of 30 million. 2022 to 2023, 626.8 million, and that maintained to December 2023. December 2024, 612 million. So between 2018, 2019, and the end of December 2024, we've moved from 414.4 million to $612 million. And that the bonds that the central bank would have purchased from the government. And I believe that that is new money into the economy, Mr. President. It may not be what we would consider as printing money, but it is new money into the economy from the central bank, providing cash to the government, Mr. President.
Thank you very much for that point of elucidation, Senator Walters. Senator Cummins, please continue.
Thank you, Senator Walters, for providing a reference referring to bonds, and also for the acknowledgement that it is not, in fact, the printing of money. So I acknowledge your own acknowledgement of that inaccuracies, and I'm happy that you have taken the invitation to correct it for the record. Thank you very much, Senator Walters. I want also to thank Senator Kevin Boyce for his interventions on the overall facilitation environment for Barbados, and to agree that there are a number of things that we still need to do. And I think I've stood here and I've said, I stand up in front of the need for us to make many of those changes. We've made the commitments to delivering them. We have started the process, but 30 years of a Companies Act being in place in response to Senator Malalou, Mr. President, will not overnight a swallow create. And so having created Business Barbados in the last year with a legislative transformation, all of the development work to get it there, and having brought the entity into operation effective Monday, I am certain that in the matter of days, 30 years of undoing will not happen just overnight. And so, as I asked in my opening comments, I am encouraging us to continue to show grace and realistic expectations on the way forward. I also did share that we are in the process already for the first quarter of developing standard operating procedures and service level agreements, of which there is the expectation that there will also be standards of service. There is already within Business Barbados, as part of the deconstruct and reconstruct process, an assessment of what other competing jurisdictions have done. So we mentioned in the other place, BVI and TCI and Cayman and so on. We know what every jurisdiction, St. Lucia, far afield as Singapore, Vietnam, UAE, we know what every jurisdiction offering each service that Barbados is providing is doing. We now know the time it takes to do it in each of those jurisdictions. But I also want to make this point, The fees that we charge, we have also done a full financial modeling and an assessment, and we know what Barbados' fees and charges have been, and they have remained static since the 1980s. There has been no change in the fees that are being levied under the company's legislation for all this time, and we've done a full comparison. So we need to make sure that before we even talk about changes in the overall structure, which we've already done, before we talk about legislative reform, which we're in the process of doing now, that we begin to look at who our competitors are, develop a competitive set, and be in a position to set the service level agreements that we want to have in place. But we also spoke earlier about the change in the corporation tax regime. We're very clear in our minds that low tax, nominal tax jurisdictions like ours, originally having a tax rate that ranged from 2% to 5.5% as an effective tax rate, that what companies are now going to accept at 9% is entirely different than what they would have accepted at 2 or 5.5%. And so we have to deliver value for money and deliver on that brand proposition that I spoke about for Barbados, and we are committed to doing that. But I can't help but say again, 30 years of a Companies Act that has been tinkered with and not reformed in any comprehensive way in that time will not happen to see changes overnight. And I'm encouraging us not to expect it. But over the first quarter, we will be in a position to tell you what we will be able to deliver, and I've already shared that so far. By the second quarter of the year, when the new financial year begins, we'll start on a new trajectory, and we will map it quarter by quarter of the year and share that information with the members of the public. And I want to give that assurance that that will be for global business, because we're talking about a category as we speak now that is eligible for foreign currency permits because they're earning 100% of their revenue in the overseas markets in foreign currency. But we're also making provision in this business facilitation ecosystem for small businesses, because small businesses also do not have the kind of capacity to deal with the over-bureaucratized structures that large businesses will be fed up and frustrated with, but have the ability to apply and send a legal officer or a legal clerk, or send a company that they have contracted. And we have to make sure that this system is fit for purpose, given the different demographic groups that we are catering to. I want also to thank Senator Morris for his comments, speaking specifically in response to agriculture and also on the questions relating to debt. And then Senator Nurse, who in your own right spoke about the bonds, not printing money, the central bank and the different structures that we have in place, and I want to thank you for your comments so far. Mr. President, I don't know if there's anything at this stage that I need to say on this bill that I have not said before, but I will take the opportunity only to express appreciation to my team for the work that they have done so far, not just in getting this done, but also I believe one of the colleagues mentioned earlier about being taken off of various lists. We have now completed our very first year of peer review under the Forum for Harmful Taxation, as well as the Global Forum, and Barbados has performed well in both instances, and I want to recognize the International Business Unit of my ministry, led by the Director of International Business, Ms. Sanjean Watkins-Diang, and her team for their continued contribution. Sometimes, and I've always said this in any of the things that I do, you see us as the ministers standing. We are guiding, we're directing, we're pushing, we're inspiring, we're sometimes quarreling, making sure that things get done. But the weeds, the actual detailed technical stuff is being done by persons who you rarely ever see. And I want to take the opportunity to stand here and recognize the work of the International Business Unit, as well as the team on the business side that was formerly KIPO, led by the former registrar of KIPO companies, Mr. Tamisha Rochester, and her team. I want to take the time to recognize both of them as outstanding public servants. And so, Mr. President, with those few words, I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. I think the ayes have it. This bill is read a second time.
Mr. President, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate are moved by a minister recommitted.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, in the absence of our Deputy President, I beg to move the appointment of an acting Deputy President for the remainder of today's sitting, and I move to nominate Senator the Honorable Lindell Nurse.
The question is that Senator the Honorable Lindell Nurse be appointed Deputy President of the Senate for the remainder of today's sitting. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator the Honorable Lindell Nurse is accordingly so appointed. Thank you, Senator Nurse, for agreeing to serve.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honorable the Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Senate is now in committee.
Permission, sir, to call the clauses in parts.
Permission granted.
Part 1, clauses 1 to 2.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 and 2 do not stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 and 2 do now stand part. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 3 to 8.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 3 through 8 do not stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 3 to 8 do now stand part. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 9 through 16.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 9 through 16 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 9 to 16 do now stand part. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
First schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Second schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do not report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Foreign Currency Permits Act of 2025.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Foreign Currency Permits Act 2025. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Order number 7, in the name of the Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve, in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Cap 225, the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of a parcel of land, the property of the state, situate at Searles in the parish of Christchurch in the island for housing development.
Mr. President, the resolution before the Honorable Chamber specifically deals with the vesting of land in the National Housing Corporation at Searles. This piece of land, this parcel of land, is approximately 18.3 acres of state land. It became state land in 2016 when, under the Caribbean Development Bank Education Sector Program 2 with the government of Barbados at the time in 2016, this land was acquired from a private landowner for the purpose of constructing a secondary school. In 2016, when this transaction was done, the construction of the secondary school was not completed. We've never had the actual work being done between 2016 and now, and the government has sought to take these lands and to convert these lands, not anymore under the CDB Education Sector Enhancement Program 2, but to use these lands for housing. I believe that there has been a national and an ongoing discussion around the provision of housing for Barbadians, and so that's what this land is being used for. There has also been a discussion around the conversion of agricultural land into residential land. I pointed out that in 2016, the land was earmarked for the construction of a school, so there was a long-standing determination as to what these lands were going to be used for in terms of construction, and the government has sought at this time to treat to the construction of a building on these lands for the purpose of a school being housing being constructed under the NHC. And so with these very few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do not pass.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. And speakers, Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too will be brief as it relates to this resolution. My brief comment, Mr. President, surrounds this whole housing thrust by the government. I don't think we should let an opportunity pass to remind this chairman, to remind Barbados that this government, as relates to housing, has just been full of promises, and more so empty promises. We've heard, and it's actually being borderline ridiculous now, Mr. President. After promising 10,000 homes 2 years ago, 10,000 homes in 5 years, starting 2 years ago, we've heard the recent rumblings of 6,500 homes in St. Lucie, in the one parish of St. Lucie. And I think it is just irresponsible for the government to be making these claims about housing and not even producing half of the housing that they intended to produce in the first instance. But I also would like to continue the call to pursue the investigations in Hope, Inc. I think it's important that the taxpayers of the country know how that $60 million have been spent. And, you know, HOPE, Mr. President, was also supposed to be one of those housing policies that would have produced energy for the house owners as well. I think the HOPE stands for home ownership, providing energy. It sounds to me now is home ownership poorly executed, Mr. President. So I think it is, we are happy to see that after calls from the leader of the opposition, that they've vested the land into the National Housing Corporation and not into HOPE. I don't think any land should be vested into HOPE or any additional financing provided to HOPE until we get the investigation of HOPE that's been promised by the Prime Minister. There have been no financial audits of HOPE since its formation as well, Mr. President, and these are concerning activities, especially with the quantums of money that have been spent or have been allocated to HOPE. And there's no transparency into the operations at HOPE. So, Mr. President, well, the leader of government business has reiterated that the acquisition was done in a previous administration and that there's no disputable agricultural land today or not. It's not that the sale went through on November 2017, and obviously the administration did not have time then, based on elections, to build the school. So that is not really in dispute, but really just wanted to bring to the chamber and to remind Barbadians that HOPE is really home ownership poorly executed, Mr. President, and that we need to make sure and keep the pressure on so that we get an investigation to that $60 million that have been allocated to HOPE over the last few years. And with those few words, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, Senator Walters. If there are no other speakers, Senator Cummins, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to just respond very briefly to Senator Walters to confirm that I believe that there was an ongoing Auditor General's report into HOPE, and that report continues. I believe that we were in this honorable chamber where the Auditor General indicated that they wanted to have additional time to be able to do the body of work that was required, and that work is ongoing, unprompted by anyone, including the Leader of Opposition. It's part of government's fiduciary responsibility for government expenditure. And so with those few words, Mr. President, in response to my honourable colleague, I beg to move this resolution do not pass.
The question is that this resolution do not pass. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. We think the ayes have it. And I think the ayes have it. This resolution for the vesting of land at Searles Plantation in Christchurch and the National Housing Corporation is now passed.
Order number 8, in the name of the Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5 of the Land Acquisition Act, Cap 228, the compulsory acquisition by the state of the parcels of land situated at Franks in the parish of St. James in this island are more particularly described in the schedules thereto for a public purpose, namely for the relocation of the Whole Town Civic Center.
Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And this is a similar resolution to the one that we just completed. This one, however, is differently located. If you recall, Mr. President, the Honorable Prime Minister in a public statement or in a series of public statements at different points would have made it very clear that we had a number of state assets that were sitting on prime commercial land that could potentially be used for different purposes. I believe in 2018 or 2019, I've forgotten which one it is, but it was one of those 2 years, there was an overall Barbados tourism investment program that stretched from, I believe it was Oistins, all the way down the coastline, down to the Kensington Oval site right by the Bridgetown port. And there were proposals at the time for there to be a replenishment of the assets that sit on the coastline to be able to refresh those infrastructure assets, to be able to have investment in those infrastructure assets also sitting on the coast, and as part of that process, to recite government assets off of the coast because they were not being used effectively in terms of the value of the real estate inland, coastal, not on the coast, inland, rather than keeping them on coastal areas which could be used for other purposes that were more investment oriented. And so on that basis, we have a number of assets along that stretch that have over time been designed or redesigned to move to inland areas to provide the identical services that they're currently providing in different locations, and to have investment in particular in the tourism sector take place in those locations. We would have seen in the newspaper the public notices that were issued under the Barbados Tourism Investment Inc., BTII, where those sites were identified, requests for proposals were submitted, or rather were invited and subsequently submitted, and they were assessed by the BTII. And out of that process, you will see that continuing. One of the commitments that the government made was that these resightings would not take place until after adequate facilities have been made available to the services that currently are vesting in those locations. Now, in the same vein, Mr. President, you would recall that in another conversation, also publicly made by Prime Minister, we talked about things like creating a logistics hub in Barbados. And so what that has meant is that you want to make sure that there is the clustering of businesses of a certain type being located in locations to be able to help to support cross-fertilization of businesses, but also to facilitate imports and exports where appropriate. This is the same thing in the case of the Trents facility and to the reciting of the Whole Town Civic Center inland to allow for tourism investment to take place on the site which currently houses the Whole Town Civic Center. This is the matter that has occupied our attention in multiple locations, and today it occupies our attention specifically in the Whole Town area. And I beg to move that this resolution do now pass, and anything that needs to be responded to, I will address in wrap-up.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummins. Senator Waters.
Mr. President, thank you again. As it relates to this matter before us, Mr. President, we understand that tourism development is important, and as in the previous debate, another senator alluded to the fact that there's this national conversation about diversification, etc. I shared with you also, Mr. President, that the contribution to GDP for tourism is on the decline as well. And you know, we're not earning as much as we did in past times as it relates to tourism. So while it is commendable in terms of looking at development and investment in the country, we know that a chunk of our foreign exchange or reserves also will be used and utilized in the construction of both the hotel property and then the rebuilding of the civic center. So again, it's just our whole conversation that we go back to in terms of our access to foreign exchange and our capacity to do these things, and if we're going to get the long-term benefits in the long run, given the fact that the data is saying that spend is significantly down and we're not earning as much foreign exchange from tourism. We know it will bring jobs, we're happy for that. It will bring work during the construction phase as well. But Mr. President, another issue here that has not really been spoken about is the fact that if we look at Whole Town itself, and Whole Town is significant into the heritage of Barbados, as it was the place where the first settlers landed, and we have something called the Whole Town Festival, which actually starts on this weekend, Sunday, February 9th. Right, Mr. President, and the historic monument, Whole Town Monument, is actually erected in the area of the Civic Center. So is that going to be demolished when the construction for the hotel for the hotel is started, Mr. President. But again, hotel is very important to us. And Hotel Festival starts February 9th, but we've not heard a song and dance about the Hotel Festival like we've been hearing a song and dance about the regathering in St. Peter now, Mr. President. And you hear the sighs, Mr. President, from the other side. And at the end of the day, Mr. President, it is important that we continue our heritage. I'm not saying that the building of the hotel will stop the festival. The government has not said if they will relocate the monument and rebuild a new monument when the new construction has commenced. But, Mr. President, it is something that, as a country, we've grown accustomed to in terms of the celebration and the accolades that go when we do that week of activities in Ho'otung. Mr. President, as I said, it just, when I was looking at this whole conversation over the last couple of weeks, and then I saw popped up that the festival is there, and then all that is being thrown at Barbadians at this time is a regathering concept, and a regathering concept that we have so much different hands in, so much different monies being spent on behalf of taxpayers' money is being spent. You don't know if it's a National Cultural Foundation initiative, if it's a Barbados Tourism Management Inc. initiative, and we don't even know what the budget is for the spend. What you see though is that a big priorities have been placed from this government to continue to promote its regathering. Well, festivals like the Ho'otung Festival are in the decline, Mr. President. And this is a concern to the people of Barbados who are watching. It's definitely a concern.
Honourable members, there's a bit of a buzz in the chamber. Please allow the honourable member to be heard in silence.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's obviously a concern to those that we're not seeing the support thrown behind these festivals. And there's also the other festivals as well, the Oasis Festival, etc., where this amount of energy now that has been all gathered up by the governing party has not been thrown to carry on and to make these festivals better and to grow these festivals, Mr. President. And we see hundreds of thousands of dollars being thrown behind regathering in these regathering activities in St. Lucie alone, Mr. President, where you have seen large structures in terms of infrastructure for sound, music, etc. And we are leaving out these traditional heritage things that we came along celebrating, Mr. President, and that should not be pushed aside. So, Mr. President, well, the plan to relocate and redo a civic center and to have more additional parking, as was said in the other place, and to replace with tourism product, I think that we have to still hold on to some of those things that we cherished. When as a boy, I used to catch one bus from Black Rock up to Ho'otung Festival. There used to be a pageant, I don't think the pageant was on the cards since 2018. There was not a pageant as well. And that's significant as relates to young ladies having into wholesome and productive activity, hairdressers, these are local designers, etc., Mr. President. So as much as we speak about what's happening at the Civic Center itself, we look at the impact that this may have at Ho'otung, and some things are happening even in a couple of days at Ho'otung, Mr. President. As we come to the acquisition itself and the relocation of the Civic Center, Mr. President, we think we need more transparency in the transaction, Mr. President. We do not know who buyer of the property is or who the government intends to sell the property to. We do not know the value of the sale as well, if it is at fair market value, etc. We have a real estate giant in here by Senator Malalu. But we do not know then, even with the compulsory acquisition that is occurring at Trent, what is the value of land that has been offered to the current owner, Mr. President. And I think it's also important to call for payments for land acquisitions to be done timely. Mr. President, we're not sure. We know that there was a recent land acquisition a few years ago done on behalf of a private developer, and we're not sure what is the state in terms of the payment of that and the value that was being offered then to that property owner, Mr. President. Mr. President, some other issues were raised by normal persons that commute the area. Persons were complaining about access to the beach, as with all of these type of legislations, etc., in terms of being able to access our beaches easily. On that stretch, Mr. President, there are only a few areas that you can really access the beach in an easy and stress-free way, because the properties are so close and congested that there's no opportunity for you to get in. And then obviously you see some level of privatization where even when you get access, you are streamlined into a specific space, Mr. President. So these are real concerns that must be considered when we discuss these type of arrangements. We also talk about, I heard mention that policing the whole town area, moving the police out could have implications for policing as well. And the availability of police is in a town center, Mr. President. There's commercial activity that you're moving outside, that you're moving outside of the area as well. So all these are considerations for the activity that would normally occur given the environs of the civic center and the amount of persons going there as well. So businesses in Ho Town could well see a fall off in business activity as well, because persons might no longer even come that route to access the new location of the civic center. And so they might come on the highway as opposed to coming up the coast road, coming down Hoarders Hill, etc., to move on to Ho Town. So it could have some implications on business, because obviously government offices attract significant amounts of business every day. So we cannot ignore the implications, Mr. President, of the foot traffic that will be removed from the economic activity in the area. So, Mr. President, as I said before, I reiterated that while we're looking for investment into new opportunities, the investment comes at a cost to Barbados. We are going to build these facilities, and we're going to use foreign exchange, as we know. So it's not that we're against development, but it is just a reality. And the income that is generating from the tourist product now, as it relates to visitors and their spend, is on the decline. So we have to measure and manage these transitions closely. Could something else be done with the civic center to bring different level of economic activity that is needed in the country? Those are considerations that could be discussed for future acquisitions. As you say, the government is targeting the coastline. So we know that oysters will be another consideration at some point, if not already. There's a nice center there as well, right, with a window to the sea. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sight from that location or from that car park over to Miami Beach, Mr. President. So with those few words, Mr. President, I just continue to caution the government that while they seek investment, there are other considerations of a social nature, and in this case of a heritage nature, that should be considered as we move to develop the country. And with those few words, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Walters. Senator Kevin Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President. I join in the debate noting that I'm holding us, I don't think I'm that strong, holding us from lunch, sir. But continuing the debate in the nature of the concept of what is value, I was listening to the leader of government business, what is value, what is investment, what is effective use. At first blush, sir, I think it makes what you call commercial sense. I believe Senator Morris earlier stated the best value, the best use of land is what you get the most money for, I believe, if I could paraphrase. But, you know, within everything, there's an element of the rub. You see, sir, we definitely want the investment, and we definitely need the investment. Taking a different tone from our colleague who just spoke, I believe that we need to be very clear with regard to the safeguards for these projects. The same way we can go forth and say we are doing this and we're looking for investors, let's make public the safeguards. And these are some ideas I have. Maybe they're captured already, and I'm sure they will be responded to. First thing, I think we need to go beyond public access as we currently conceptualize it. I think in 2025, public access should no longer be a track at the side of a development which is accessible to all, including those who are disabled, to access the water. That's number one. And I've seen that done, and I believe that Town and Country is usually very vigilant in building it in. But it's more than that, sir. I would like the public access model that we see in the Hilton incorporated into these developments. And here's why. There are some institutions, whatever their business model, which excludes the public from interacting. Now, if it is that we are giving up, I wouldn't say crown jewels because they're not going anywhere and they're not being effectively utilized, we're saying. But if we're saying that these are such beautiful areas which have such opportunity, could it be that we're building an access to locals and Barbadians in terms of how they are utilized in the future? And when we do this development, whatever it is, we need to mandate the windows to the sea preservation. And what do I mean by that? If you take a drive, we've said it here time and time again, you look at these big buildings and some are monstrous, lacking any type of architectural depth, and I'm not an architect, but you can look at something and say whether it look good or it look bad, or something which can actually, as we pass by, capture the surrounding area and say, wow, that's a nice vista, even though there is a building there. Or wow, that's the area where we can go and park, and while we can't go and splash with the tourists in the pool, we could be in the public area and swim, because we hope and we know, I think all of us here, if it's one thing that galvanizes all Barbadians, black, white, B, D, E, P, M, P, is access to the beach. So for the time we see that being encroached, we know Gabby will come out and all of us will get together and we'll stop any infringement of that. But the same way we have that preservation, the same way we have that vitality for what we recognize, can we ensure that whatever development goes on preserves that aspect? I believe, sir, the term that flows from that is an architectural concept and a development concept called placemaking. Now, I have a cousin who does affordable housing development in San Francisco. And the concept by that is that when you do your development, and I believe this will capture some of the concerns raised by Senator Walters, you are at pains to ensure that whatever is done incorporates itself with the surrounding areas. So you don't have something that is incongruous to the landscape. You don't put a big, shining metal edifice next to a coral stone. I digress, but the concept is that how far do we go in seeking the economic chalice while then running the risk of losing what makes Barbados, Barbados? And that's how we have that development push and pull. Sir, I don't think any of us can have a serious conversation about development in Old Town without recognizing the flooding risk. This is something which has been debated. It was supposedly, there's an issue, depending on where you go on social media, it ain't working, is climate change, is heavy rainfall, is unprecedented rainfall, is whatever. The point is, this is a clear and present risk which will need to be considered in any development that is done. Recognizing that I'm speaking from that position where I don't have to deal with them, and motivated perhaps by statements made, why is it that there is not a built-in for these projects that will come on, or sorry, let me change that. Could it be that when the government is considering these projects to move forward, that there is a built-in provision for the public investment, the same unit trust that we're talking about? In other words, hear me out, Mr. President, you're familiar with the concept. If I'm a developer and I'm coming in to do a development, and that development is of a certain value, there could be a way which allows either for a portion of the financing to be able to be purchased by locals on the market, or for some form of IPO in relation, because we do need some help in the stock market, for some type of entity which then captures that building and the entity that will be doing the hotel. The majority, of course, is held by the developers and its financiers, and maybe 5 or 10% held for the public or for even the government of Barbados to invest. But if wishes were horses, beggars would be kings, sir. I think, sir, building on, though, in terms of the access point and the development and how we do it, in terms of, I believe, I said placemaking is what they call it, we need to be, I think, dream a bit bigger. Sir, I take great pride in going to our beaches and using the facilities that are kept so clean by the workers. When I bring guests from other islands, they're amazed that when you go into a bathroom on the beach in Barbados, the bathroom clean. You don't see that other places, and the bathroom's free. Other places you have to pay. So we have these lovely facilities which workers work very hard. I think the NCC, you will hear them, you know, very loudly expressing whatever is going on, but they keep the place clean. So the question is, when I say developmental of these areas, whichever hotel or development comes, let's ensure that the beach facilities are condition precedent for doing that. You get to build your big fancy hotel, you get to make all your money, but you see this half acre or this acre here? That is what you're doing for the citizens of Barbados. You're going to be doing the beach facilities, you're going to be doing a play park, you're going to be doing access. It doesn't cost much, and the Town and Country Department already does it for certain type of developments. I believe they try it in Jamaica to some extent, but these things have issues. We are in a position, if we are the ones granting the conditions for the persons to do the development, that this can be specifically incorporated. Finally, sir, the risk of overdevelopment. We continue to fix and improve and build, and that's a good thing. The question is, though, when the same tourists that are coming here because of our sea and sand and all the other good stuff that we offer start to say, but we are no longer the unspoiled gem of the Caribbean Sea, and let's go on to the next best thing. We then have put ourselves in a position which may not be sustainable. So in whatever we do, we can't go too far. We have to maintain what makes Barbados, Barbados in whatever we do. But sir, we go brave, and I thank you for the opportunity to make a small contribution.
Thank you very much, Senator Kevin Boyce. And Speaker, Senator Dr. Haynes.
Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. President. As a resident and a business owner in the Whole Town area, it would be amiss of me not to lend my voice to the debate on this resolution. Usually when we see resolutions coming through this mechanism, we're acquiring privately owned lands for public use. In this situation, it appears that we are making a case to take public lands out of public use for a private purpose, and that therefore is what is creating the need for this land acquisition in Trents. I listened very keenly to the contributions in the other place, trying to get some clarity on it, and I ended up going down a rabbit hole. I want to thank the Department of History of the University of the West Indies for their support in my mission to get some clarity on the history of the Whole Town area. Every speaker so far has made reference to the value of Whole Town as a heritage site. And this year marks 400 years since the first English landing occurred. First and Second Streets, which we all know, were actually the first and second streets in Barbados. Barbados's first fort was established, called the Whole Fort, in 1630. This year would mark 395 years of uninterrupted public use for law enforcement and for the preservation of law and order. The site has value beyond what can be extracted economically, and that is what I want to focus on today. We have a Planning and Development Act that most of us who are here would have participated in the debate back in 2019 and when the subsequent amendments occurred in 2020 or 2021. And Section 53 of the Planning and Development Act speaks to the listing of cultural heritage buildings, monuments, and sites. Section 53 says that the minister shall cause to be compiled list of buildings, monuments, and sites of prehistoric, historic, or architectural merit, interest, or may adopt with or without modifications any such list compiled by the Barbados National Trust or other bodies or persons, and may amend any list so compiled from time to time. Now, I, in my research, discovered that the Whole Town Police Station is listed as a heritage site. It's listed as a heritage site, sir, because the entryway to the police station is a part of the rebuilt fort, because it was a massive hurricane in 1780 that demolished the 1630 fort. It was rebuilt in 1780, and in 1993, when another government decided to bulldoze the remains of the original fort to put the Civic Center as it now exists, one thing remained, and that was that the entryway was the entryway of the 1780 fort. So here it is a listed heritage site. Further to that, it is a listed archaeological site. So my friends at the Department of History sent me a copy of which I've made a document of the house. They have a copy already. The Journal of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. This edition dates back to 2002. It is the 48th edition. And it makes reference to the fact that prior to the demolition of what was left of the ruins of the original fort, the Barbados Museum sought to invite an archaeologist to do some exploration of the site before everything got erased. His name was Dr. Peter Druitt. He came in 1990 to do the exploration prior to that build-out. A surface collection, and I'm quoting, the document's already a document of the house, a surface collection of artifacts indicated that there was activity in the surrounding area during the 11th to 12th centuries AD, and that there was continuous occupation of the site from the 17th century onward. So further to what I told you about the police station, the site itself, which the Civic Center is currently located on, has been listed by us, by our government, as an archaeological site. So there are certain obligations that go along with having these special listings. So Section 34 of our Planning and Development Act tells us that no person shall execute any works for the demolition, alteration of a listed building, monument, or site, except minor works which should not materially affect its character, whether or not such works would ordinarily constitute development or permitted development under this Act without applying for and receiving planning permission. I suppose that they have. And then it goes on, subsection 2 of section 54, it says the board shall consult with the Barbados National Trust and such other bodies or persons having special knowledge of the buildings, monuments, and sites of prehistoric, historic, or architectural merit or interest as may be specified by the direction of the minister. So consultation should have occurred with the National Trust or other interest groups or other people who might have a special knowledge of the history of the area. I can't tell you if that consultation has happened because until it came to the other place a couple weeks ago, I didn't really know much about this. Further, obligations. Section 56. Every owner and occupier of a listed building, monument, or site is responsible for the conservation, rehabilitation of that building, monument, or site. The board shall, as far as practicable, assist the owners and occupiers of listed buildings, monuments, and sites in procuring financial and technical assistance for the purposes of the conservation, rehabilitation of such monuments, buildings, and sites. So, my struggle with this, and I'm a team player, but I have struggled with this and I just feel like I haven't gotten answers. I was actually told to sit this one out by somebody else. No one here, but my conscience wouldn't let me stay in my seat. We have spoken a lot about heritage. We're actively building out at Newton Burial Ground. We have done some works at Golden Square so that people could better understand the story of what happened there. Right now, there's a simple obelisk standing in commemoration of the landing. I think that we could do more to tell the story of this site, not just of English settlement, but the story of the Amerindian community who were here before all of us, our indigenous population who were decimated. I understand that there's tremendous economic value for any beachfront in Whole Town, but can we save some of it for us? Even if we don't keep the police station there, my personal view is that this should always be publicly accessible land. Ideally, I would love to see a green space. I would love to see some kind of creativity go into what could be designed to go there so people can enjoy and get a better understanding of the history. We've heard the cases being made about traffic congestion in the area. I don't know how having a 9-story hotel on one side of the canal and a 7-story hotel on the other side of the canal are going to alleviate traffic congestion. It's already a mess, let's be honest. We haven't heard about environmental impact. We know that the West Coast is not sewered. When we're adding additional hotel rooms, how is this going to affect the coast? And in terms of beach access, other than Bats Rock and Folkestone, I can't tell you a facility where I can park, have a sea bath, turn around and shower, pack my bags, and leave comfortably. Everywhere else along the West Coast, because coastal development in Barbados, particularly on the West Coast, since the 1950s, has allowed wealthy, usually foreign developers to come and build wall to wall to wall to wall to wall. We have no view, and if you want to get on the beach, we are squeezing between a couple of walls. I love Gibbs Beach, but I am always wary about wringing an ankle when I have to go onto Gibbs Beach. And we know what the practice has been for decades. I cannot sit here and be a part of something where I feel like we're allowing it, we're perpetuating the problem. So like Senator Boyce would have said, we need to be very, very clear on what the guardrails are for these developers. Tourism is notoriously extractive, we know that. We heard about job creation, but then still we heard the workers' union overwhelmingly telling us their challenges with regards to the treatment of hotel workers. A lot of them are being hired only on a part-time basis, basically being brought on between November and April, being sent home during the summer months. What we know is that the average room attendant is making around $440 in a luxury, because there are different categories of hotels. Luxury is the highest paid. They're taking home $447 a week, I think. So when we talk about job creation, we also need to think about the quality of jobs that we're creating. What I would like to see personally in this new Barbados, in this new republic, let's start having a conversation about Barbadian ownership. How do we get a piece of the pie? How do we get to participate? I noticed when we did the medicinal cannabis industry, we did a nice little carve out where we said, if you have deep pockets and you're not from here, we want to make sure that you partner with a Barbadian. So we made a carve out so that 30% ownership had to be Barbadian. We don't hear that kind of conversation for tourism. So these very, very wealthy, usually non-national people, God bless them, they've done a lot, created jobs, all that stuff, but at the end of the day, it has to be done in a way that's sustainable, in a way that's inclusive, in a way that honors our history and our heritage. And I'm not getting enough information because I'm a part of the government and I don't know myself. I heard a conversation this weekend and I was told it was a done deal. I was saying, well, it hasn't been passed in the House yet, so I don't know. So I kind of went off script with some of my notes, but I think I've made my point. Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Haynes. Member Speakers, Senator Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it's on days like this that we will miss Dr. Carl Watson. Mr. President, I stand 100% behind what Senator Haynes has just said in her contribution. Sir, we've had a tourism development policy that allows developers to knock down hotels and build villas, two family houses. So we take out hundreds of rooms and replace them with two villas. And then we come and say, these pieces of real estate that the state owns, that the people owns, should be sold now for tourism development. But we consistently have allowed, and I say we, I mean successive governments have allowed it. You knock down a hotel, you buy a hotel, knock it down, and you build villas and condominiums. And then we say, well, this is the only space we have left. This is the last window to the sea. If you drive from Bats Rock to St. Lucie, sir, you could be in Miami. You will not see the sea except for probably 3 places. Soon, there might be 2. Sir, the people of this country should not feel that they cannot access the beach on the West Coast because it's unaffordable. I happen, sir, to be invited to a brunch on Sunday at a famous upmarket hotel. And it was high tide. Beach was beautifully manicured, lovely umbrellas. But everyone had to walk in the water because the high tide was in. That is what will happen in Old Town. As happens on all the beaches now. If, as has been said by a former Prime Minister, that land must achieve its highest economic value, then we will have no regard for the past. Old Town was the first settlement. The actual site that the landing occurred, we're now being told, is going to be used for tourism development. I have no idea what details are. But what will be dug up? What will be dumped? What will be buried? What will become of it? I do not believe, sir, that the people of this country should only be allowed to walk in the water at high tide. I think there have to be places, spots among the sites where the real estate is exceptionally expensive, that we can go and lie on the dry sand without fear of being told, these umbrellas are down to the high tide mark because we're allowed to do it and you can't be here. Hurricane Beryl was a great leveler. It redefined, to a large extent, the high tide mark. I have not seen the evidence that those in charge have relooked at high tide marks, because once the sand disappeared, it meant that the rules about where a high tide mark began should have been enforced, but that's a different matter. But there will always be ebbs and flows of the sand, and beaches will come and beaches will go. But we, the people who are here, have to have access to the beaches. There is no reason, sir, when somebody collapses on a beach, the ambulance attendant should have to scramble with a trolley through a little narrow path to get them into the ambulance. Yes, with technology, you'll get drones and everything else that will bring medical aid. But I think, sir, that access to the beach should not just be defined by a 6 or 8 foot path. Particularly, sir, when we recently debated and passed in this House a bill, an extensive bill, sir, that expanded on part of our Constitution. Sir, when we do these developments, and our Prime Minister has been overseas relatively recently, sir, as a champion, once again, of climate change, and a champion of green development. Sir, but when we do these developments, will there be measures taken, sir, to make sure that our coral reefs, or what is left of them, will be preserved? And what impact will it have on the coral reefs? What impact will it have on our fish populations? What impact will it have on our sea turtles? Will turtles still nest on the beaches when the light is there? Sir, there should be some places in Barbados where one can walk or drive and see the sea. You should not only have to go to the East Coast, sir, to see the sea from the road. Sir, if I had a vote today that meant something, I would vote nay. Because I believe, sir, that some things are worthwhile keeping. I thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Maynard. Senator Reverend Morris.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too will join this discussion. And as a student of history myself, sir, I would want to express my support for some of the sentiments expressed. I have said it, I don't know if I said it in here, but this problem we are facing with the West Coast has been, in my opinion, began around 1960. Again, let me establish that. It began around 1960 when the entire, or we can't say the entire because that would not be true, a large majority of the West Coast was sold to foreign entities. Okay? Without taking into consideration the historicity of the area. There was no consideration for heritage. There was no consideration, sir, for locals, or access to the beach. It was just development for development. And there's no doubt that contributions were made towards the economy. There's no doubt about that. I could support the moving of or the rebuilding of a new police station further inland. Because Holt Town itself, those of us who have to come from St. Peter, and Black Bess in particular, would know that Holt Town can get very, very congested. I have no problem with that. But I have a problem, sir, when it comes to our heritage. I believe, sir, in heritage. I believe in monuments, I believe in statues, because these all tell a story. It tells a story about who we were, who we are, and who we will be. And what has me concerned, sir, it is okay to talk about the monument in Holt Town and other monuments, but I too was opposed to the removal of Nelson. I was opposed to it. But we have people walking up and down this country talking about Barbados and we need this and we need the next. I believe that such people, sir, could take a lime in Travers Way or walk up and down Travers Boulevard. Travers Way or Prescott Boulevard. That's what they need to do. But we are disrupting the history of this country when we try to distort it. And I'm opposed to all of that. I know why I did history, sir, apart from theology. Because the first time I went to Bridgetown, I was a little boy. And let me say so that even when I started to go to school in Bridgetown, I did not even know where to go. The first time I went to Bridgetown, I saw this man standing on this pedestal. And I asked my grandmother, what is that? And she told me about Nelson. And what she told me generated an interest in history. And that is why I did it. That is why I did some of the archaeology with Dr. Watson, Carl Watson. May he rest in peace. But we must not choose which statues and which emblem must go and which ones must stay. Which leads me on, sir, to another fact. That if you travel from Oistins to right up to Half Moon Fort, St. Lucie, ask yourself, how many open areas are there to the sea? Compare how many were there before and how many there are now. And if you get past 3, sir, then we have plenty. And we're talking about from Oistins right up to Half Moon Fort, St. Lucie. Yes, we have a heritage to protect. But it also refers to the land, because I'm hearing some double talk. I am hearing that we must pay people for the land that has been acquired. But yet we want to take up the land owned by Colonel Drax without the requisite acquisition, because that's what is being spread in this country as well. Either we'll do it fairly or don't do it at all. But don't do it at all. I remember someone left here and went up in England, went down in Dorset and told them, come up, we want your land. Right. Come out, we want your land. But it's that kind of behavior, sir. It's that kind of attitude that will also characterize us. We don't do that. You put a case, but to go up a man's backyard and argue, come out, come out, come out. We want your land. Okay, sir? We have to decide in this country if we're going to deal with things and deal with them fairly and squarely. Because there are a number of commentators who, in my opinion, do not know the history of the situation, and they want to make their comments. Put up everything that is black, tear down everything that is white. No, sir. We want a united society, a society that is there for all. All. Whether you're blue, black, pink, yellow, whether you're anything, it's for all. That is why now, sir, I now touch the point of regathering. Because it is amazing, or virtually amusing, to hear a call for the retention of a monument in Holtown. And Holtown Festival was started, I think it was 1975 or 76. Retention of a monument and a festival, no problem with that. I agree with that, sir. But yet you're going to speak with Doubletown about regathering. And I believe that if there's the greatest symbol now in Barbados and in the Caribbean and in the world.
Senator Reverend Morris.
Yes, sir.
You cannot, according to our rules, accuse any honorable member of speaking with double tongue. You will need to withdraw that and continue. Please withdraw.
Sir, I withdraw your request, but I didn't accuse. I said I'm hearing persons speak with double tongues. I withdraw, sir. I withdraw, sir.
The context and the reference to the content may be mistakenly believed to have referenced comments made during the course of the debate today. So for the utmost of caution, you should withdraw.
Withdraw, sir.
And yes.
Withdraw. But let me talk about, as I said, I have no problem with festivals, because that is part of our story. And one of the things about memory, sir, and storytelling is that it allows us to be truthful. It allows us, as I said, to say who we are, who we were, what we are, and who we become. But it also gives us storytelling. It also gives us, as I'm sure Senator Dr. Rogers will tell you, that spirit of forgiveness, as spoken by, or written by, I think it's Desmond Tutu. That whole concept of forgiveness, it allows us to cast away all of those psychological scars that we may be having. So that is why these things are important to me. But now, when we talk about regathering, sir, they cannot tell me or praise the Holtown Festival and not also look at regathering. Look at what is happening in this world. If there is one time that a concept like regathering is most important, is now. What are Barbadians saying? We're saying to everyone, come, come, no matter who you are. Not only Barbadians are we calling, we hope that Barbadians will come and celebrate with us. Come and learn, come and be part of our economy. Come and see where you can invest. Come. Why? Because I believe in following Jesus, not too much being a Christian, but I believe in following Jesus. Because I believe in the universality and the inclusivity of the gospel. So come. But who you are, come. But what are we witnessing, sir, in one of the largest economies in the world? Leave, go, we do not want you. Note the two, sir, come. And the other one said, go, we do not want you. We can make it without you. Barbados is saying, come, we want to make it with you. And that should be a caution to all of us. A caution to all of us. Be careful, sir, how we go about these things, because sooner or later, we are going right back to where we were. We are saying, no longer are we qualified for a position based on our ability, qualification, qualifications and everything, competence to do it, but on who or what we are. So I feel a certain way, sir, maybe not to the extent of Senator Haynes, but I am asking us that we take our heritage into consideration. Maybe what we need, rather than tearing down buildings, tearing down statues, we need some of our parents to go with our children and say, this is because, this is what happened. And then we're able to say to our children, like the Israelis said, not the Israelis, the Israelites said, not the Israelis, the Israelites. The Israelites said to their children, this shall not happen to us again. Lest you forget. Thank you, sir. Lest you forget. And I'm hoping, sir, that our heritage will be, and as you know, I'm from St. Peter, sir, and we are celebrating heritage. St. Peter, we're gathering his heritage. And of course, sir, you would know that if you really want to talk about heritage, you come to St. Peter. That is where the first throne was built. Sir, you were good. That is where the first throne was built for King Cuffy. So I know that there are others who may disagree with me, but they would never tell me how to interpret history, sir. He will never tell me how to interpret history. But the truth is, sir, I may have exaggerated, but I hope I made the point. I hope I made the point, though, that we preserve that which is ours. That which tells the story. And rather than preaching division, let it be known, especially in Barbados, that white, black, brown, pink, yellow, blue, all of us are part of that story. All of us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Reverend Morris. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of this sitting of the Senate for lunch for a period of 1 hour to resume at 3:30 p.m.
The question is that the sitting of the Honorable Senate be suspended until 3:30 p.m. today. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it. Our sitting is suspended until 3:30 p.m. today.